the day Louisa Doyle buried her husband. The sky over Caldwell, Kansas, was the same relentless blue it had been every day of their marriage, wide and indifferent, and full of the kind of light that left nowhere to hide. She stood at the edge of the freshly turned earth with her 7-year-old daughter Clara pressing against her hip and her 5-year-old son Thomas gripping the hem of her black wool skirt. And she made herself a promise so quiet that not even the preacher, standing 3 feet away, could have heard it. She would not fall, she would not ask, she would work. That was what she knew, that was what she had, and that would have to be enough. The year was 1879, and the Kansas plains in September were golden and merciless in equal measure. The grass rolled like a slow sea all the way to the horizon, and the town of Caldwell sat at the edge of the Cheyenne Strip like a man leaning too far over a ledge, always one bad season from tumbling into the territory below. It was a cattle town, raw and loud and smelling of dust and livestock, the kind of place where a widow with 2 children and a failing homestead was nobody's particular concern. George Doyle had been a decent man and a poor farmer. He had left Louisa with 40 acres of cracked earth, a sod house that breathed dust through its walls when the wind blew, 8 chickens, 2 pigs, a milk cow named Patience, and a debt to the First Farmers Bank of Caldwell that totaled $312. He had also left her with the kind of grief that does not come in a wave but in a slow leak, the kind that drains you drop by drop while you are too busy to notice you are running dry. The banker, a pink-faced man named Halford, had come to the graveside reception and spoken to her with the carefully modulated sympathy of a man who intends to foreclose in 90 days regardless. She had thanked him for his condolences and said nothing about the debt, because she had nothing to say about it yet. She did not know how she would pay it. She only knew she would. That was the beginning of it, the beginning of a season that would grind her down to something she did not fully recognize, and also the beginning of a season that would give her something she had never expected. She had heard of Isaac Townsend before she met him, the way you hear of most things in a cattle town, through fragments, through the word of the general store owner and the remarks of women standing in line at the post office, through the particular way men got quiet when they mentioned his name, as if respect was something that required a lower volume. He owned the Townsend Ranch, which sprawled across 1,200 acres 4 miles east of Caldwell. He ran cattle, longhorn Texas cattle, driven up the Kishom Trail and fattened on Kansas grass, and he ran them well. He was known to pay his hands a fair wage, which made him an object of mild suspicion among the other ranchers. He was 29 years old, unmarried, and he attended church on Sundays with a regularity that the town's women found both admirable and faintly intimidating. She had also heard that he was not a man who wasted words. The first time she actually saw him was 3 weeks after the funeral, at Hargrove's General Store. She had driven the wagon in from the homestead at first light, Clara and Thomas bundled on the seat beside her, the morning still cool enough that their breath made small clouds in the air. She needed flour, salt, lamp oil, and thread for mending the bare minimum, and she had counted out the coins the night before, sorting them in the light of the kerosene lamp until she knew exactly what she could afford. She was loading the sacks herself because the young Hargrove boy had gone around back for something, and she had not asked him to help, because she did not ask for help, because asking felt like the first step in a direction she could not afford to go. She became aware of someone standing behind her, not a threatening awareness, just a quiet one, the sense of a particular stillness. And when she turned, she found a man watching her with a kind of steady attention that was not rude and was not casual either. He was tall, with the lean, weathered build of someone who has spent most of his life outdoors. His hat was dark with sweat at the band, and his hands were the hands of a man who worked. His eyes were a very clear gray, the color of the sky just before rain, and they were watching her with something that she would not name as concern until much later. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, and touched the brim of his hat. She was startled that he knew her name, and then she remembered that everyone in a town of 800 people knew her name and that she had been the widow in the black dress at the First Methodist Church 3 Sundays running. "You have the advantage of me," she said. "Isaac Townsend," he said. "I have land east of town. Your husband and I shared a fence line for a quarter-mile on the south side." She nodded, adjusting the flour sack in her arms. "I remember George mentioning you. Can I carry that?" The words were so straightforward that they caught her off guard. He was not asking with elaborate solicitude, not tilting his head with the particular performance of a man who expects her to be grateful. He was just asking, the way you might ask someone to pass the bread. "I am fine," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through his expression, not offense, not pity. Just a kind of quiet acknowledgement, the way a man notes the weather and adjusts his plans accordingly. "All right," he said, and stepped back, and that was that. She carried the flour to the wagon herself, lifting it over the side with the kind of determination that made her back ache for 2 days afterward. And she did not think about Isaac Townsend again until the following Saturday, when her fence line broke. The broken fence was the beginning of a run of disasters so steady and unvarying that Louisa came to regard each one the way a soldier regards incoming fire, with a kind of grim professional attention that she could not have maintained if she had allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. The fence was the first. It ran along the north side of the property, and when it went down, Patience the cow wandered through onto the neighboring section and had to be retrieved from a creek a half-mile away. Louisa mended the fence with wire and posts and a hammer, working in the October heat that still had summer's teeth in it, while Clara kept Thomas out of the way, and the chickens scratched in the dirt with total indifference to her situation. Then the pig pen roof collapsed in a windstorm, and she repaired it with salvaged timber and sheer stubbornness. Then one of the pigs just died, no apparent reason, the way livestock sometimes did, which represented a portion of her potential spring income lying still in the mud. She buried it and did not cry, because she was saving her crying for when she was alone in the dark after the children were asleep, and even then she rationed it. The debt sat in her mind like a stone in a boot, always there, always pressing. $312. 90 days from the funeral, which had already been a month ago. She had $60 put by, saved from 3 years of selling eggs and butter at the Caldwell market, and that $60 was also the money she needed to last the winter. She could not spend it and also keep it. She did the arithmetic at night until she knew it by heart, and the arithmetic always told the same story. She needed income, and she needed it before January. She had skills. She could sew. She put a notice at Hargrove's, mending and alterations taken in reasonable rates. She got 2 shirts and a dress in the first week, mended them, returned them, was paid $1.20. She was not going to earn $300 sewing shirts at 30 cents a garment. She could cook. She approached Mrs. Blanchard at the boarding house on Main Street and asked if she needed kitchen help. Mrs. Blanchard was kind about it, which was worse than if she had been unkind, and told her she was fully staffed, that she was sorry, that if anything changed she would send word. She could teach. She had more schooling than most women in Caldwell, having attended the female seminary in St. Louis before she married George at 18. She went to see Mr. Potter, the head of the school board, and asked about a teaching position. He was not unkind either. He told her the school already had a teacher, a Mr. Abernathy, who had held the position for 6 years and showed no signs of leaving. October deepened and she kept moving, because stopping felt like dying. She was mending a fence post on the east side of the property, the side that adjoined the Townsend ranch, on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October when she heard a horse coming at a walk. She did not look up from the work. She was driving the post into the ground with a mallet, and the mallet required her full attention because the ground was harder than it looked and she was already tired. Mrs. Doyle. She looked up. Isaac Townsend sat his horse with an ease that spoke of 1,000 hours in the saddle. He was wearing a sheepskin coat against the afternoon chill, and the light was doing something warm to the gray of his eyes, turning them almost golden where the sun hit. She straightened, pushing her hair back from her face. She was aware that she was not at her best. Her skirt was dusty. There was a smear of dirt on her forearm, and she had been working with enough intensity that she could feel the perspiration at her collar. "Mr. Townsend," she said. He looked at the fence post, at the mallet in her hand, at the pile of tools beside her, and his expression did the same thing it had done at the general store, that quiet, noting quality like a man taking in information and deciding what to do with it. "That post is cracking at the base," he said. "About 4 inches down." She looked. He was right. She had not seen it. "I'll use a different one," she said. "I've got a wagon load of cedar posts at my place. I had them cut for a section I'm repairing on the north pasture. I have more than I need." "Thank you, but I am managing," she said. "I know you are," he said. There was nothing condescending in his voice. He said it the way you'd state that the sky was blue. "I'm offering cedar posts that I have extra, not suggesting you are incapable." She looked at him. The afternoon light lay across the prairie like something spilled. A meadowlark sang somewhere nearby and then went silent. "Why?" she said. It was a blunt word, and she meant it as such. She had been the recipient of too much charity that came with a cost she had not anticipated. The neighbors who brought food and then expected her to listen to their concerns about whether she could really manage alone. The women at church who were kind and also watchful, measuring her grief against some standard she did not know and apparently could not meet. Isaac Townsend looked at her for a moment without flinching. "Because I have extra posts and you need one," he said. "That is the whole of it." She believed him, which surprised her. "I would pay for them," she said. "I am not asking for payment, I just said I have extra. I would still pay." Something shifted in his expression, not irritation, but something that might have been the beginning of amusement. "Tell you what," he said. "When spring comes and I need hands for branding, if you are willing to cook for a crew of 12 for a week, we'll call it settled." It was a fair exchange. She could feel that immediately, the evenness of it, the way it gave her something to stand on rather than pushing her into the posture of someone being given to. "That is agreeable," she said. "All right," he said. "I'll have my man, Garrett, bring them by tomorrow morning." He touched his hat again and turned his horse, and she watched him ride back across the section line, and she noticed that she was breathing more easily than she had been a few minutes before, which she filed away without analyzing. The cedar posts arrived the next morning, 12 of them, stacked from the back of a wagon by a weathered ranch hand named Garrett Webb, who was approximately 60 years old and spoke in syllables rather than sentences. She thanked him and he nodded and drove away, and she spent the rest of that day replacing the worst of her fence posts with the cedar ones, working steadily and feeling, for the first time in weeks, like the ground under her feet was slightly more solid than it had been. November came in cold and flat and mean. The first norther hit the second week of the month, driving down from the Oklahoma Territory in a wall of icy air that had the town of Caldwell buttoning itself up like a man pulling a coat closed. Louisa banked the sod house against the wind with extra earth along the north wall and hung blankets across the door, and kept the fire going from the woodpile George had laid in before he died, which was a mercy, because there was enough wood to last through January if she was careful. Clara was 7 and had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, which expressed itself in ways that were both maddening and comforting. She took on tasks around the house with a seriousness that was too old for her years, and Louisa had to stop herself sometimes, watching her daughter carry a water bucket from the well with her small arms straining, from going to her and saying, "I am sorry you have to do this." Because saying that would require Louisa to admit how hard things were, and she was not ready to do that, not even to herself. Thomas was 5 and made of a different material, entirely soft and quick to laugh, with George's round face, and a habit of asking questions at 3 in the morning that were unexpectedly theological. He called Patience the cow Patchy and spoke to the chickens by name. He did not fully understand that his father was gone, or rather he understood it in the way 5-year-olds understand permanent things, as a fact that he accepted and then moved past without quite processing the full weight of what it meant. Louisa loved them both with a ferocity that frightened her sometimes, because loving them was also the main reason the arithmetic about the debt was so terrifying. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for them. She took in more sewing. She sold 2 jars of honey from the 2 hives George had kept, and discovered that she had a slight talent for keeping bees that George had not possessed, which was information she stored away. She sold eggs at the market every Saturday, setting up her small table next to Mrs. Fitch from the neighboring section, who had 7 children and a husband who was more interested in whiskey than wheat, and who understood therefore the particular arithmetic of making very little stretch very far. Mrs. Fitch was also, Louisa discovered, a reliable source of information about Isaac Townsend. "He bought the Kellerman place last spring," Mrs. Fitch said, wrapping eggs in newspaper with the practiced efficiency of long habit. "That was another 300 acres. His father started the ranch back in '68, but he died 4 years ago, and Isaac has been running it since. No mother to speak of, she passed when he was young. There is a foreman named Webb, that older man, and a crew of about 8 regular hands. He runs a clean operation, pays fair." She paused and glanced sideways at Louisa. "He is well thought of." "I noticed he is at church on Sundays," Louisa said, in the neutral tone of a woman who is gathering information and has not yet decided what to do with it. "He is," Mrs. Fitch agreed. "He sits in the 3rd row on the left. He was courting Mary Alderton for a time, about 2 years ago, but nothing came of it. Her family moved to Colorado." Another sideways glance. "He is not the type to press himself on a woman." Louisa looked down at her egg table. "No," she said, "I do not think he is." She saw him at church that Sunday, sitting in the 3rd row on the left as advertised. He saw her too, across the narrow aisle that divided the congregation, and nodded the same brief, composed acknowledgment he had offered at the fence line and at the general store. She nodded back. After the service, while the congregation gathered in the cold November air to exchange the news of the week, he came to stand beside her in the manner of a man who had decided to do so and was not making a production of it. "How are the posts holding?" he asked. "Very well, thank you. Cedar is better than what I had. Cedar lasts." He looked out over the street, where horses stood tied at various posts, and a dog was investigating something under the steps of the millinery. "The hard winter will test the lines. Make sure you check them after the first real freeze. The ground heaves when it thaws, and it can loosen a post even if it was solid going in." "I will remember that," she said. Clara had Thomas by the hand a few feet away, and Thomas was straining toward the dog with the single-minded interest of a 5-year-old who has decided that something is his friend. Isaac Townsend looked at them, and something moved across his face that was not pity and was not the particular assessment of a man calculating something. It was softer than that, more private. "Good kids," he said. "They are," Louisa said, and meant it simply. He stayed for another few minutes, speaking of inconsequential things, the weather, a report that there was a new preacher coming to the Methodist church in the new year, and then excused himself and was gone, walking to his horse with the same unhurried competence that seemed to characterize everything he did. She did not examine how she felt about the conversation until she was home that evening, with the children in bed and the fire banked and the sewing in her lap, and what she discovered was that she had enjoyed it. Not in the giddy way she had occasionally enjoyed conversations with men when she was 17, and believed that all problems were temporary. In a quieter way, the way you enjoy a meal when you are genuinely hungry, with a kind of grateful simplicity. She put that away too, carefully, in the same mental chest where she was keeping all the things she was not yet ready to fully examine. The chest was getting quite full. December arrived, and with it a full accounting of what she was facing. She had, as of the 1st of December, $83. She had earned it through sewing and eggs and honey, and 2 days she had spent at the Hargrove store filling in when Hargrove's wife was ill, for which he had paid her $1.50 a day. She had the 60 she had put by and 23 more earned in the last 2 months. She needed $312 by the 15th of January. She was $229 short. She sat with that number in the cold lamplight of the sod house and felt, for the first time in months, a crack in the determination she had been carrying like armor. Not a break, just a crack, a line in the stone through which the cold was getting in. She pressed her hand flat on the table and breathed, and then she picked up the account book and wrote the number down, and beside it she wrote everything she could do between now and the 15th of January to close the gap, and the list was not as short as she feared and not as long as she needed. She could sell 2 pigs, but she only had 1 pig now, since the other had died, and the price for pigs in December was lower than spring. She could get perhaps $12 for the pig. She could sell the remaining chickens, but then she would have no eggs to sell come spring, and the eggs were her most reliable income. She could borrow against the cow, but borrowing was exactly what she was trying to pay off. She could take in laundry. She had not considered it before. It was hard physical work, boiling and scrubbing and wringing, the kind that left your hands raw, but she could do it, and there was a market for it among the single cowboys who came through Caldwell and had no one to wash their shirts. She wrote it down. She could offer herself as a hired cook for the larger ranches in the area. Ranch cooking for a crew during the busy seasons, she could do that. She had agreed to do it for Isaac Townsend in the spring, but perhaps she could find other situations before then. She wrote it down. She worked through Christmas. She took in laundry from 4 cowboys who were wintering in Caldwell between drives, hauling their shirts and trousers and bedrolls home in the wagon, scrubbing them in the cold until her hands were red and cracked, and earning $4 a week. She made Clara and Thomas small gifts from things she had on hand: a rag doll with button eyes for Clara, a carved wooden horse George had started and never finished that Louisa completed with George's pocket knife, working in the evenings by lamplight until the shape was right. Christmas dinner was a chicken she could spare and dried beans and cornbread, and a dried apple pie that Clara helped make, standing on a stool at the table with her flour-dusted hands and her complete concentration. And when they sat down together, the 3 of them, Louisa looked at her children across the small table and felt the grief and the love in such equal measure that she could not have told you which was heavier. Thomas looked up from his plate. "Mama," he said, "is Papa watching us from up in heaven?" "I expect he is," she said. "Is he eating too? I expect heaven has very good food, better than this pie." Clara asked, with the skeptical expression of someone who was quite proud of the pie. "I don't think so," Louisa said. "I think this pie is the best there is." They ate, and the fire kept the cold outside where it belonged, and Louisa allowed herself, just for the length of that meal, to stop running the arithmetic. She ran into Isaac Townsend at Hargrove's on the day after Christmas, both of them there for the same reason, to catch the post that had come in late from Wichita. He was collecting something. She was hoping for a letter from her sister Incent. Louis and they waited at the same counter while Hargrove sorted through a canvas bag with the slow precision of a man who enjoys the power of being the one who knows where things are. "Good Christmas?" Isaac asked. "It was," she said, and meant it more than she expected. He nodded. He had his hat in his hands, turning it once in that slight habitual motion she had come to recognize as something he did when he was thinking. "I drove out by your place yesterday. Saw some of your fence lying along the road. The northwest corner post is leaning." "I know," she said. "I am going to address it this week when the ground thaws a bit. I'll send Garrett." "No," she said, more sharply than she intended. She took a breath. "Thank you, but no." He looked at her without reproach. "Why not?" She turned to face him more directly. "Because I am not a project, Mr. Townsend." Something moved across his expression, swift and private, something that might have been respect or something adjacent to it. "I did not say you were. You did not say it, but sending your man to fix my fence without being asked comes to the same thing. I am perfectly capable of reading my own property and addressing what needs addressing." "I know that," he said. "I am sorry. That was not the intention." She believed him again. the same way she had believed him about the fence posts. He had a quality of plainness in his speech that she had come to find almost startling. So many men in her experience spoke around things, approached them obliquely, said what they thought you wanted to hear. He did not do that. "Thank you for saying so," she said. Hargrove produced their respective mail. There was a letter from her sister in St. Louis, which she held to her chest for a moment before tucking it into her bag. Isaac had a small parcel which he accepted without particular curiosity. At the door, he paused. He did not turn around for a moment, and she had the sense that he was deciding something. He turned. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "I have beef in my cold larder that is more than my crew and I will use before spring. I would be obliged if you would take some. Not charity," he added before she could draw breath. "You agreed to cook for my crew in the spring. Consider it an advance on the arrangement." She held his gaze. The light in Hargrove's store was thin and yellowish, and it caught the planes of his face in a way that made him look older than 29 and also, somehow, very sincere. "How much beef are we discussing?" she asked. "Enough for the winter, a side maybe a little more. That is a generous advance against a week of cooking." "It is also beef that will otherwise go to my dogs," he said, "which seems like a waste." She almost smiled. She could feel it at the corner of her mouth, the small pull of it, and she let it come just a little. "All right," she said. "I will accept the advance on the arrangement." He nodded. "Garrett will bring it tomorrow morning." "I will be home," she said. She walked out into the cold Caldwell Street and stood in the winter light for a moment. The letter from her sister pressed against her ribs, the conversation still settling through her like a stone dropped in still water, sending out rings she could feel but not fully see. Garrett brought the beef the next morning, a full side wrapped in canvas, carried in the bed of the wagon with a quietness that she appreciated. He also brought, alongside it and without mention of it, a sack of oats, a small keg of salt, and a twist of tobacco that she strongly suspected was meant for her rather than her livestock, and that she accepted without question because the winter had taught her which hills were worth dying on. She read her sister's letter that night. Margaret lived in St. Louis with her husband and 3 children, and she wrote in long, looping sentences full of news about the city and the children and a new theater that had opened. And at the end of the letter she asked, as she always asked, whether Louisa would consider coming to St. Louis now that she was alone, whether things were too difficult, whether she needed help. Louisa wrote back the next day. A careful letter, warm and full of the details Margaret would want, saying that she was managing, that the children were well, that she had prospects for the spring and the land was good and Caldwell was a fine place. She did not say anything about the $312 because she had made herself a promise, and the promise included not asking Margaret. She sealed the letter and posted it and went back to work. January came and the laundry kept coming and the sewing kept coming, and she took in a job cooking for a cattle buyer from Texas who was wintering in Caldwell with a group of 5 associates, going to their rented house on 2nd Street every morning for 2 weeks and cooking their breakfast and midday meal, which paid her $7 a week and gave her a window of time each morning when Clara watched Thomas and the world was, briefly, just the size of a kitchen. By the 10th of January, she had $218. She needed 94 more in 5 days. She sat with that number and the crack in the stone widened, and then she set her jaw and went to see Mrs. Blanchard at the boarding house again. And this time Mrs. Blanchard had a position, because her kitchen girl had left to get married in November, and she had been managing with her daughter who was not suited to the work, and everyone was exhausted. She offered Louisa $12 a week, daily except Sunday, starting immediately. Louisa took it. She paid the debt on the 14th of January, 1 day before it was due, in bills and coins that she laid on Halford's desk in the bank while he counted them twice, and then looked up at her with an expression she could not quite read, part surprised, part something that looked uncomfortably like chagrin. "Your account is settled, Mrs. Doyle," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She walked out of the bank into the January air, and the cold hit her face, and she stood on the sidewalk of Caldwell's Main Street and took 3 slow breaths, and the crack in the stone sealed itself, because the stone itself was different now, not harder but more certain, the way something is certain when it has been tested and has held. She saw Isaac Townsend riding past on Main Street, coming from the direction of the livery. He slowed when he saw her standing on the sidewalk, read something in her face, and guided his horse toward her. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She was aware that she was smiling, and she did not try to stop it. His eyes moved from her face to the bank behind her and back again. "Good news," he said. "The debt is paid," she said. Something changed in his expression, a warmth in those gray eyes, a kind of quiet pleasure on her behalf that had no performance in it. "Good," he said. "That is good, Mrs. Doyle." "It is," she said. He did not say anything about how hard it must have been, or express admiration in the way that sometimes felt like being handled. He just looked at her with that clean, direct regard, and it was worth more to her than a speech. "I will see you Sunday," he said. "You will," she said. He rode on down Main Street, and she watched him for a moment, and then turned and walked back toward the boarding house and her shift in Mrs. Blanchard's kitchen. And she noticed that the winter cold did not feel quite as cold as it had an hour ago. February came, and Louisa's life settled into a shape she had not expected to be sustainable but was. She worked at the boarding house 5 days a week and kept the sewing and the eggs and the bees, and she paid the regular expenses and ate and kept the fire and watched the children grow. And she found that the shape of independence, once you had fully inhabited it, had a particular kind of solidity. On Sunday mornings at First Methodist, she sat across the aisle from Isaac Townsend, 3rd row on the left, and they spoke after the service and sometimes walked a few minutes in the same direction before their respective routes diverged. The conversations were easy in the way that honest things are easy, without the expenditure of energy required to maintain a particular impression. She talked about the boarding house and he talked about the ranch, and they talked about the weather, which in Kansas in February was always a serious topic. One Sunday in mid-February, he asked if he could walk her home. She considered this for a moment. Not because she was uncertain of the answer, but because she wanted to be honest with herself about what she was saying yes to. "I have the wagon," she said. "The children need to get back before the wind picks up again." "I have a horse," he said in the same even tone. "But I can walk back to the livery the long way." She nodded. "Then yes," she said. He tied his horse to the wagon and walked alongside it as she drove, with Clara sitting between them on the seat and Thomas standing in the wagon bed, holding the side rails and pointing out features of the landscape that he found significant, which included a particularly interesting rock, 3 prairie dogs, and what he insisted was a wolf, but which was demonstrably a large dog from the Fitch farm. "That is not a wolf," Clara told him, with the devastating certainty of someone 7 years old addressing someone 5 years old. "It might be," Thomas said. "It is a dog," Louisa said. "It is a very large dog," Isaac offered from his side of the wagon, and Thomas looked at him with the instant seriousness of a child who has found an unexpected ally. "Exactly," Thomas said. "Very large." Clara looked at Isaac with a slightly narrowed expression, assessing him the way her mother assessed things, with a direct attention that missed very little. Then she appeared to make a decision about him and let the wolf debate pass. At the end of the road that led to the homestead, Isaac untied his horse and touched his hat and said good afternoon, and she said good afternoon, and he turned back toward town, and she watched him go for just a moment before she clucked the horse forward. He came again the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. It became, without either of them naming it, a regular thing, a walk in the bright cold winter air with the children between them, and the conversations ranging easily from practical to something harder to categorize, something that had more warmth in it than information exchange but less heat than declaration. She learned things about him. He had been born in Missouri and come west with his father when he was 12. He had had 2 years of formal schooling, and had read everything he could get his hands on since, with the result that he knew more than most men she had met who had had 10 times the formal education. He had a dog named General who was approximately the size of a small calf, and who was, in Thomas's estimation, the greatest dog in the territory. She also learned that he watched her, not obtrusively, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in the way a person watches something they are trying to understand, with attention, with patience, with a quality of care that was all the more striking for being entirely unsentimental. One afternoon in late February, she was at the boarding house when Mrs. Blanchard, who was not an unobservant woman, caught her looking at the clock. "Go on, then," Mrs. Blanchard said. Louisa looked up. "I beg your pardon. It's past 4. The Sunday washing up is done. Go on home before the cold gets up." Mrs. Blanchard had a face like a friendly turnip and eyes that saw everything. "That Townsend man will be waiting to walk you to the road." "He is not," Louisa began, and then stopped because it was very nearly true. "He is a good man," Mrs. Blanchard said, turning back to her pots. "Better than most. I knew his father, steady, same blood in the son." Louisa untied her apron and said nothing, and went out into the February afternoon. He was at the church when she came by, leaning against the post rail outside in the cold with his hat tilted against the low sun, talking to Reverend Hammond about something that made the Reverend laugh. And when he saw her, he straightened and said good-bye to the Reverend, and came to walk beside her. And she thought about what Mrs. Blanchard had said, that he was steady, and recognized the truth of it with a feeling that was almost frightening, because it meant something she had not yet decided she was ready to mean. She told him that day about paying the debt. She had not told him the full story, the arithmetic, the laundry in the cold, the cattle buyer's kitchen, the days she had done the math and found it came up short, and then found a way to close the gap anyway. She told him now, walking along the road in the February afternoon light, and he listened with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the path ahead, and he did not interrupt, and he did not offer admiration in the handled way that she had come to dread. When she finished, he said, "That must have been very hard." Just that. Just the plain acknowledgement of it, and the word hard in his mouth had a weight and an honesty that made her eyes sting briefly before she blinked it away. "It was," she said, "but I did not see another option." "There are always other options," he said. "Most of them cost you something else." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat once in that slight way. "I mean you could have asked for help from the neighbors, the church, your family. That would have been an option, but you knew the cost of it, what it would do to your sense of yourself. So you chose the harder path because the cost of the other one was too high." He paused. "I am not saying that was wrong. I think I would have done the same." She considered this. "Yes," she said finally, "that is exactly it." He nodded. "I know," he said, with a simplicity that told her he did not just mean he understood her logic, but that he understood her. They walked the rest of the way to the road that led to the homestead and stood at the turning point in the late February light, with the wind coming down from the north and the smell of cold earth and distant snow in it. "Mrs. Doyle," he said. "Louisa." Her name in his mouth was different than it was anywhere else. She noticed that. She noted it the way she noted the lean of a fence post or the condition of the soil as information that mattered. "Yes," she said. "I would like to come calling," he said, "properly, if you are willing." She looked at him. He was standing completely still, the wind pulling slightly at his coat, with that quality of patient attention that she had come to think of as the essential thing about him. The way he could wait without urgency, without pressure, as if he had all the time there was and would spend it however she needed. "I am a widow with 2 children and a sod house," she said. "I know what you are," he said. "I am asking what you are willing to." She held his gaze for a long moment. The wind moved across the prairie around them, and the cold was real and present, and the land stretched away in all directions under the winter sky, and she was standing at the corner of a road she had walked 100 times, and somehow it felt like a place she had never been. "Come to dinner Sunday," she said, "if you are willing to eat whatever I have in the larder." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. "I will bring bread," he said. "Then I will see you Sunday," she said. He touched his hat and went, and she stood there for a moment with the wind on her face and something warm moving through her chest that she recognized, finally, for what it was, the beginning of wanting something for herself. He came to dinner Sunday with a loaf of bread that was better than anything Louisa had made in 6 months, because it turned out he baked, which was information she absorbed with the interest of someone cataloging pleasant surprises. He sat at her small table with Thomas and Clara and ate the roast she had made with a portion of the beef he had supplied, and he was easy with the children in a way that was not performed, not the studied joviality of a man who wants to be liked, but the natural ease of someone who has no agenda with small people. Clara asked him if he had ever seen an Indian. "Clara," Louisa said. "She is asking a fair question," Isaac said, not in the tone of a man placating a child, but in the tone of a man who means it. "I have," he told Clara. "Several different nations, the Osage and the Cheyenne when I was growing up, and the Cherokee in the Indian Territory. They are people like anyone else. Some I have met have been very good to me." Clara considered this with her head slightly tilted. "Have they been treated fair?" she asked. Isaac's expression was honest in a way that Louisa appreciated. "No," he said. "Not always, not usually. That is something this country will have to reckon with." Clara nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. Thomas, who had been following this with the focused incomprehension of a 5-year-old trying to grasp a large concept, decided the concept was too large and went back to his bread. After dinner, when the children were in bed, she and Isaac sat on either side of the small table with the lamp between them and talked in the quiet way of two people who have found each other's company genuinely restful. He told her about the ranch, the plans for the spring drive, the new pasture he was opening on the north section, the question of whether to add sheep, which he was inclined against on the grounds that sheep and cattle were a complicated combination on the same land. She told him about the bees, which were her current project. She had ordered 2 more hives and was planning to expand the honey production through the spring and summer and sell at the market and possibly to the dry goods stores in town. "That is a good idea," he said, with the focused attention he brought to practical things. "There is also a market for beeswax. The candle maker in Wichita buys it. I did not know that. I can put you in contact with him. His name is Burroughs. Honest man." "I would appreciate that." He looked at her across the table in the lamplight, and there was something in his face that she recognized now as the particular expression he wore when he was about to say something direct, something he had been thinking about for longer than the conversation. "You are building something real here," he said. "I want you to know that I see that." She was quiet for a moment. "That matters to me," she said, "that you see it." "I know," he said, "because if you were just—" She stopped. "Just waiting for you to need saving," he said, not harshly, just finishing the sentence. "Yes," she said. "I am not," he said. "I have never thought of you that way, not for a single day." She believed him. The believability of it was its own kind of warmth. March came in with the smell of mud and snowmelt, and the particular electric quality of the Kansas spring, which was not gentle but was alive in a way that winter was not. The grass came back green and insistent across the prairie, and Patience the cow, released from the winter pen, went out into the pasture with a satisfaction that Louisa found deeply sympathetic. Isaac came to the homestead on Sundays and sometimes on a Thursday evening when his work allowed, and the shape of his presence in her life shifted from a pleasant surprise to a comfortable thing like knowing where a chair is without having to look for it. He had not kissed her. He had not moved beyond the courtship of presence and conversation and the occasional, careful brush of his hand against hers when they stood at the fence looking out at the spring pasture. She was aware of this patience, she catalogued it, and she found that she was grateful for it. Not because she was uncertain about him. She was, by March, quite certain about him, but because there is a difference between certainty and readiness, and he seemed to understand that without being told. The day that changed things was a Thursday in late March, when he came to the homestead to find her on the roof of the chicken coop, which had developed a leak. She was up there with a hammer and a tin of nails and a bundle of tar paper she had purchased at Hargrove's, working methodically from the south end toward the north, with the spring wind trying to lift the tar paper and her determined to prevent it. Clara was below feeding the chickens, who were unsettled by their roof being repaired and were expressing their discontent with considerable noise. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of his horse on the road, the creak of the gate. She did not stop working. Louisa, she looked down from the roof. He was standing below, looking up at her with an expression she had not seen before, not his usual composure but something urgently alert, almost alarmed. "The wind is picking up," he said. "Come down from there." "I am almost finished," she said. "The wind is picking up from the south," he said. "The kind that brings weather. Come down now, please." She looked at the sky. He was right. She had not been watching the sky. She had been watching the roof, and while she had been watching the roof, a bank of clouds had come up from the south with the peculiar yellow tinge that meant something was building. "One more nail," she said. "Louisa." His voice had an edge in it that she had never heard before, a kind of controlled fear that got through to her in a way that pure instruction would not have. "Please." She drove the last nail, gathered the tin, and came down the ladder. He was at the bottom, and when she stepped off the last rung, he put his hands on her arms just for a moment, just to steady her, and she was suddenly extremely aware of how close he was, and of the warmth of his hands through her sleeves. "Look at that sky," he said, and she looked. The cloud bank was moving fast, and it was the wrong color, not the dark blue of a regular thunderstorm, but that green-yellow that meant rotating air, that meant the kind of Kansas spring storm that could become something serious very quickly. "All right," she said. "Let us get inside." They got the children into the sod house, Clara calmly, Thomas excited about the sky in the way that small boys are excited about weather. And Isaac secured the chicken coop door and the pig pen latch and brought Patience in from the pasture with a practiced efficiency that told her he had done this 100 times on his own land. She was watching from the sod house doorway, the wind pulling her hair loose, and she thought, he moves through a crisis without losing himself. And she thought, I do too. And she thought, there is something particular about finding that in another person. The storm hit hard and fast and lasted 40 minutes and left a skin of hail across the ground that Thomas immediately wanted to collect in his hat. Isaac stayed through the storm and afterward, helping her assess the damage. The tar paper roof she had just finished had held, the chicken coop door had held, the pig pen had held. A section of the south fence had gone down and a window shutter had blown off, and that was the whole of it. You built this place to take weather, Isaac said, standing in the aftermath with the hail-cold air around them. George was good at that, she said. The structural things, he was good at those. He looked at her. You speak of him plainly, he said. Should I not? No, I think you should. He paused. Some people cannot. She thought about George, decent, poor farmer, good father in the time he'd had, the man who had built the sod house solid against the prairie sky. She thought about the grief that leaked instead of flooded, and how she had been inside it for months without being destroyed by it, and how that was because she had been too busy to be destroyed and because she was, fundamentally, someone who moved forward. He would have liked you, she said. And she meant it, and it surprised her a little to mean it, and it also felt like something releasing, some carefully held tension going out of her. Isaac looked at her steadily. The afternoon light after the storm was that washed, clarified light that comes when the air has been wrung out, everything sharp and clean and very clear. I want to ask you something, he said. Then ask, she said. I told you I was not coming here to save you. I meant that, and I still mean it. You have built something here and you are building more, and you do not need saving. He turned his hat once in his hands. But I am a man who wants a partner, not someone to take care of and not someone to be taken care of, just a person to build something with, who sees what I am doing and whose work I can see back. He looked at her. I think you are that person. I think we could be that for each other. She stood in the hail-cleared air with the clean smell of the spring storm still in it, and felt the whole weight and length of the last 7 months, the debt and the laundry and the roof and the fence posts and the arithmetic in the lamplight. And she felt also this present moment, which was nothing like any of that except in being real and solid and requiring her full attention. "I think so too," she said. He looked at her with those clear gray eyes and said, "Then I am asking you to marry me." It was not a speech. There was no kneeling. The hail was still on the ground around them, and Thomas was trying to count it, and Clara was watching them from the sod-house door with an expression of unnerving comprehension for a 7-year-old. "Yes," Louisa said. "Yes, I will." He reached for her hand and held it, and the warmth of his grip was a simple, honest thing, and she held it back with the same simplicity. They were married on the 3rd of May, 1880, on a Saturday at First Methodist Church in Caldwell, Kansas, with Reverend Hammond officiating and Mrs. Fitch and Mrs. Blanchard in attendance, and Garrett Webb standing near the back with his hat in his hands, and a surprisingly emotional expression for a man who communicated exclusively in syllables. Clara wore a white ribbon in her hair that she had chosen herself with intense deliberation, and Thomas wore his best shirt and his best suspenders, and fell asleep against Garrett Webb's arm 20 minutes into the reception at the church hall, which Garrett appeared to find entirely acceptable. Louisa wore a dress she had made herself from blue cotton lawn that she had ordered from the Wichita Dry Goods catalog in March, working on it in the evenings after the children were in bed, sewing by lamplight with the particular pleasure of making something for a specific and anticipated joy. When Isaac saw her in it, standing at the end of the church aisle, he had the expression of a man who has seen something that confirms what he already believed, and she had walked toward him with her heart full and steady and unafraid. They said their vows in the plain language of the Methodist ceremony, and Isaac's voice was even and unhurried, and when he said "I do" there was nothing in it but total conviction, and she said "I do" back to him with the same conviction, and meant it the way she meant the things she had committed to that year in the lamplight completely, with the full knowledge of what she was taking on. Afterward, at the church hall, Mrs. Blanchard produced a wedding cake that was an achievement of pioneer baking, 3 layers with dried cherry preserves between them, and the men from the Townsend ranch who had come into town for the occasion stood around the edges of the room with the slightly formal discomfort of men who are trying to behave well in an indoor setting, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing. Isaac danced with her. He was not a natural dancer, but he was a determined one, moving with the same methodical competence he brought to everything, and she laughed genuinely, freely, a laugh that surprised her with its own fullness, when he made a wrong step and recovered with complete gravity. "I should warn you," he said, "that the dancing is not going to improve." "I do not need the dancing to improve," she said. They moved together across the church hall floor, and she thought about the 7 months that had brought her here, all that work, all that difficulty, all that stubbornness. And she thought about the moment at the general store when she had refused to let him carry the flour sack, and the moment at the fence when he had offered cedar posts not as charity but as surplus, and the afternoon by the road when he had said he was not interested in saving her. And she thought about how sometimes the path to something good runs directly through the hard ground and not around it. Thomas, who had woken up refreshed from his nap, danced with Clara by the window in a manner that was more gymnastics than music, but that conveyed enthusiasm if not precision, and Garrett Webb watched them with a softer expression than she had ever seen on him, and Isaac kept her hand in his as they moved, and the fiddle played on into the May evening, and Caldwell was all around them with its dust, and its cattle sounds, and its good and difficult and real life. The homestead and the Townsend ranch required some consideration once the marriage was settled. It was Isaac who brought the subject up on the evening after the wedding, in the practical manner she had come to love, not avoiding the logistics in favor of sentiment but treating both as real and equally worth addressing. "The sod house is yours," he said. "Your land is paid and it is good land. We should keep it. The east pasture of the ranch runs against your south fence line. We could run a gate through and combine the pastures, which would double the grazing range." "And the house?" she asked. "I would like you and the children to come to the ranch house," he said. "It is larger and more comfortable, and I will not pretend otherwise. But your sod house and your property remain yours." "Always, that is not negotiable from my side." She considered this. She had a practical mind about land and property, had had to develop one in the last 7 months, and she recognized good sense when she heard it. "All right," she said. "We keep the sod house, we run the gate, we live at the ranch." "And," he said in a tone that had something careful in it, "Clara and Thomas are mine if they want to be. I will not push it, but it is my intention." She looked at him. "You should talk to them," she said. He did. The next day he sat with Clara and Thomas in the ranch house parlor, a larger and higher-ceilinged room than anything the children had seen up close, and spoke to them with the same plain honesty he brought to adult conversations. And Clara asked 3 direct questions, and Thomas asked if General the dog could sleep in their room, and Isaac said yes to Thomas and answered Clara's questions without condescension. And by the end of it, Thomas had decided that Isaac was his father, and Clara had decided that she would make up her own mind as she went along, which was, Louisa thought, more like herself than anything Thomas did. The ranch house was a different kind of life. Not easier exactly. There was still the physical reality of the Kansas plains, still the weather and the work and the unpredictability of ranching, which was a life of small margins and constant vigilance. But it was a life with more room in it, literally and in other senses. There were 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen with an iron stove and a pump at the sink. And there was a parlor with shelves of books that she fell upon with a hunger she had not known she had been suppressing, working her way through them in the evenings while Isaac went over the ranch accounts at the desk in the corner, and the children slept upstairs. The spring branding came in the 2nd week of May, and she cooked for 12 ranch hands for a week as she had promised, working from before dawn until after dusk in the ranch kitchen, producing the quantities of food that a crew of working men requires in a way that would have been grueling if she had not found it, unexpectedly, genuinely satisfying. She was good at it, the organization of it, the timing of it, the alchemy of simple ingredients in large quantities. The hands ate with the focused appreciation of men who have been eating their own poor cooking for months, and know quality when they encounter it. Garrett Webb, who ate at the main table rather than with the hired hands by virtue of his foreman status, ate 3 portions of her biscuits without looking up and said, at the end of the week, "Best cook since Sacramento," which from Garrett was a speech. By June the bees were established in their expanded number, and the honey was coming in good. She had 4 hives now, positioned in the east meadow where the clover was thick, and she was producing more honey than she could sell at the Caldwell Saturday market. She wrote to the candle maker in Wichita that Isaac had mentioned, a man named Burroughs, and received a prompt reply offering good prices for beeswax in quantity, and began a correspondence that became a small but steady secondary income, sending beeswax on the regular stage to Wichita. She kept her hand in the Saturday market, though, because she had built relationships there that mattered to her independent of the income. Mrs. Fitch was still at the table beside hers, and they talked through every Saturday in the way of women who have earned each other's frankness, and Louisa listened to Mrs. Fitch's complicated news about her husband and her 7 children, and the section that seemed to grow problems like the soil grew grass. One Saturday in July, she brought Clara and Thomas to the market, which she sometimes did if Isaac was occupied with the ranch. Clara helped at the table with an efficiency that made the other market women smile, and Thomas wandered in the permitted radius of 4 feet and talked to anyone who stopped, with the uninhibited sociability of a 5-year-old who has decided the world is his friend. A man stopped at the table, not to buy honey. Louisa felt immediately, just from the quality of his attention, which was not directed at the goods. He was broad and weathered and smelled of trail dust, and he looked at her with the kind of look she had learned in the last year to recognize as a man calculating something. "You the widow from the Doyle place," he said. "I am Mrs. Townsend," she said, and was surprised by how naturally that came out and by the satisfaction it gave her, not as an erasure of what she had been but as a statement of the present fact. "Can I help you?" The man blinked, recalculated. "Townsend, as in Isaac Townsend." "As in," she said. He bought a jar of honey with a sudden charm that had not been there a moment before and left, and Clara watched him go with an expression uncannily like her mother's, the direct assessment, the filing away of information. "I do not like him," Clara said. "No," Louisa agreed. "Nor do I." She mentioned it to Isaac that evening, not from alarm but from habit. They had developed a practice of telling each other the things they observed, not just the significant ones but the small ones too, because in their respective years of self-reliance they had both learned that the small things were often where the real information lived. He nodded, listening. "What did he look like?" She described him. Isaac's expression went through something brief and private and then settled back into its usual composure. "I think that might be Red Calloway," he said. "He works for some of the smaller operators south of the Strip, buyer and occasional nuisance. Does not matter, he will not bother you." "He did not bother me," she said. "I am merely informing you." "I know," he said. "That is why I am glad you told me." She looked at him across the dinner table. Clara and Thomas were in bed. The house was quiet. The summer night was coming in through the open window with the smell of cut hay from the south pasture. He looked back at her with that clear, even gaze, and she thought about all the ways this life was different from what she had imagined and all the ways it was better, and she thought about the word partner which he had used in the hail-washed afternoon in March, and about how well it fit what they actually were. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That you were right in March," she said. "About what specifically?" "About us being able to build something together," she said. "About what this could be." He held her gaze for a moment, and the look in his face was the warmest thing she had ever seen in a man who was constitutionally disinclined to performance, a warmth that was all the more real for never being performed. "Come here," he said. She stood and went around the table to him, and he pulled her down to sit beside him and put his arm around her. And they sat together in the summer evening with the window open and the quiet of the ranch around them. And it was the most peaceful thing she had known in a year that had contained very little peace. The summer moved through its long, hot days, and she found that heat she had always found a burden was less burdensome, when it meant the garden was thriving and the hives were full, and the cattle were fat on the summer grass. She tended the vegetable garden she had planted on the north side of the ranch house: tomatoes, beans, squash, corn, all the things that the Kansas summer could produce with enough water. And she learned the rhythms of the ranch in the way you learn the rhythms of any new place, by being present in it through all its moods. She went back to the sod house on a Tuesday in August, not for any particular reason, just because it was hers and she had been feeling the pull of it. She brought Thomas, who wanted to visit the chickens that still lived there, tended now by a young ranch hand named Billy who had taken a sincere interest in them. She walked through the small rooms: the main room, the bedroom where she and George had slept, the small front room that had served as everything else, and she let herself feel it. The grief was still there, lighter now, a different shape but present. She stood in the main room and thought about the nights she had sat at that table with the lamp burning and the arithmetic refusing to balance and the children breathing in the next room, and she felt, with a quiet clarity, that she had been right to stay, that the cost of that year had been worth the ground she stood on now. She was standing at the table when Thomas ran in from outside with Billy's hat on his head and flour on his hands from something Billy had apparently been doing, and he looked at her with George's round face and said, "Are you sad, Mama?" "A little," she said honestly, "but a good kind of sad. Do you know what that means?" He thought about it. "Like when you miss something but it is okay because you still have the good parts." She stared at him. He was 5 and he said that. "Yes," she said, "exactly like that." He handed her Billy's hat, which appeared to have been entrusted to him for reasons that were not entirely clear, and went back out to supervise whatever Billy was doing in the kitchen area of the sod house, and Louisa stood in the main room and smiled. Fall came, and with it, the settling in of a life that had found its shape. The ranch accounts were good. Isaac had run a clean operation before she came, and they ran it together now, she taking over the bookkeeping and the supplies management, which freed him for the physical oversight of the land and the cattle. She was a meticulous keeper of accounts, the kind of person who caught errors at a glance and took satisfaction in the columns balancing, which was a skill refined through a year of making very little go very far and knowing the cost of inattention. He noticed this. He noticed everything she did, with that quality of attention she had come to think of as one of the defining characteristics of Isaac Townsend, the way he saw what was actually in front of him rather than what he expected or wished to see. He said, one evening in October while she was going over the supply order for winter, "You have a better eye for numbers than I do." "George never balanced a ledger in his life," she said. "I learned because I had to." "Whatever the reason," he said, "you are good at it." She looked up from the ledger. "Isaac," she said. He looked at her. "I am glad," she said. "In case I have not been sufficiently clear about that, I am glad about all of it." He reached across the desk and put his hand over hers, covering it completely, the way he had held it in the hail-washed afternoon and on the church floor on their wedding day, with a sureness that was never demanding, just there. "So am I," he said, "every day." November of 1880 brought snow early, and Louisa in early November had a private conversation with herself, and then a conversation with Isaac. And in March of 1881 their son was born, a loud, red-faced, thoroughly healthy boy who arrived into the world at 4 in the morning with the assistance of Mrs. Fitch, who had delivered enough children to have lost any anxiety about the process, and who pronounced him perfect, and handed him to Isaac with the businesslike confidence of long practice. Isaac held his son with an expression that Louisa, watching from the bed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from the other side of great effort, would remember for the rest of her life. Not triumph, not even simple joy, but something more complicated and more complete than either. A kind of total presentness, as if every part of him was in that single moment, attending to the small weight in his arms. "He looks like you," she said. Isaac looked up at her. His eyes were bright in the lamplight. "He has your hands," he said. "What will we call him?" He looked back at the baby. "George," he said, "if you are willing." She had not expected that, and she had not asked for it, and it was, therefore, exactly the kind of thing he would think to offer. She held it for a moment, the offering of it, the grace of it. "Yes," she said, "George Isaac Townsend." And he nodded and looked at his son and said the name quietly as if trying it on, and it fit. Clara came in at dawn to see her brother, standing in the doorway in her nightgown with her hair unbrushed, and she looked at the baby in Isaac's arms and then at her mother, and then back at the baby with the same assessing directness she brought to everything. "He is very small," she said. "You are also very small," Louisa said. "I do not remember that," Clara said with some skepticism, and came to look more closely and apparently decided after examination that he was acceptable. Thomas arrived a few minutes later, rumpled from sleep, took one look at the baby, and immediately claimed him as his personal project, saying with great conviction that he was going to teach the baby to ride a horse as soon as possible. And the baby, who did not yet have opinions about horses, made a small sound that Thomas interpreted as enthusiastic agreement. George Isaac Townsend grew that year with the particular determination of a child who has been wanted completely, and he was a loud, joyful, tremendously stubborn person from the earliest age, who looked exactly like Isaac, and had Louisa's absolute refusal to admit defeat, which was a combination that would serve him well. The summer of 1881 was a good summer for Kansas, and for the Townsend Ranch. The cattle drive in June went well. Isaac rode with it to Abilene, and came back 11 days later with the proceeds, and the slightly tired but satisfied expression of a man who has done what he set out to do. Louisa managed the ranch in his absence with Garrett as her right hand, and when Isaac returned and went over the week's accounts and management decisions, he looked at her with something that was not surprise, because he never seemed surprised by what she was capable of, but with a satisfaction that was all the more meaningful for being directed at the work rather than performed for her benefit. "You sold the Kellerman parcel," he said. "It was not producing," she said. "I sold it to Harlow at market price. The money is in the account." "I have been trying to decide what to do with that parcel for 2 years," he said. "It was a straightforward decision," she said. "For you maybe." He looked at her. "Thank you. That is what partners do," she said. He smiled. The full, real smile that she had learned was rare and always meant exactly what it looked like. "Yes," he said, "it is." Clara turned 9 in 1882 and began attending the Caldwell School in earnest, coming home with a mind full of questions that she expected to have answered fully and accurately. And Louisa answered what she could, and said "I do not know" when she did not know, and sent the unanswerable ones to Isaac, who treated Clara's questions with the same gravity he brought to the ranch accounts. Clara rewarded this by deciding that Isaac was, upon consideration, her father, which she announced at dinner one evening in the same matter-of-fact tone she used for all declarations of fact, and then went back to eating her beans. Isaac looked at Louisa across the table. She looked back at him. George, who was 14 months old and was eating beans in a manner that bore only a loose relationship to conventional technique, made an enthusiastic sound. "All right, then," Isaac said to Clara. "Obviously," Clara said. Thomas, who had required no announcement because he had made his own decision about Isaac in the first 2 weeks and had been operating accordingly ever since, looked between them with the benign satisfaction of someone watching things fall into their correct order. The fall of 1882 was a rich and busy season. The bees had produced well through the summer. She was up to 8 hives now, and the honey production had become a genuine commercial operation, supplying 3 stores in Caldwell and the arrangement with Burroughs in Wichita for the wax. The candle maker had, over the course of 2 years of correspondence, become something like a business associate, and his letters were full of market information that she found genuinely useful. She was sitting at the desk in the parlor one evening, going over the honey accounts for the quarter, when Isaac came in from the range and stood in the doorway reading the room as he always did, and she looked up and he looked at her, and the lamplight was on his face, and she thought, "This is the person who sees what I am doing," and she thought, "I see him back," and she thought, "We built this." He came to the desk and looked over her shoulder at the accounts. "Good quarter," he said. "Better than last year," she said. "If we add 2 more hives in the East Meadow for spring, and I contract directly with the Wichita market rather than going through Burroughs as intermediary." "You are going to put Burroughs out of a job," he said with that near smile. "I am going to be more efficient," she said. "I will write Burroughs and explain it and offer him first purchase at the wholesale rate." "That is fair," he said. "He will appreciate it. He is a good businessman. He will understand it." Isaac put his hands on her shoulders, standing behind her, and she leaned back slightly into the warmth of his presence, the accounts still in front of her and the autumn evening quiet around them and George's small sounds from upstairs where he was allegedly asleep but clearly was not. "Louisa," he said. I need to tell you something." She turned to look up at him. Something in his voice had shifted not to alarm, but to the careful register he used for things that mattered. "What is it?" "The Harlow parcel, the one you sold last year across the north fence." "Yes. Harlow has sold it on to a buyer from St. Louis, a man named Clement. He has plans to fence the creek line." She understood immediately. The creek that ran through the Harlow parcel was the secondary water source for the north pasture of the Townsend ranch. If it was fenced and access denied, it would require a significant rerouting of the northern herd during summer. "Is it legal for him to fence the creek?" she asked. "In Kansas, water rights on private land are still being settled in the courts," he said. "He may have the right to fence it or he may not. I need to get the law looked at." "How much would it cost to buy the parcel back?" "More than we have liquid right now. The cattle drive proceeds are already allocated for the winter maintenance and the new barn. She was quiet for a moment, thinking, what is the timeline? When will Clement fence? He is in St. Louis until November, which gives us approximately 6 weeks. She turned this over. 6 weeks to solve a problem that had 3 potential solutions: buy the parcel, contest the water rights in court, or reroute the northern herd. The third was a practical adaptation if necessary. The second was expensive and uncertain. The first was financially constrained. What if we offered Clement a water-sharing arrangement, she said. He keeps the parcel, we keep creek access on the north side in exchange for easement rights and a fair annual payment. Isaac looked at her. He is a buyer from St. Louis, she said. He likely has no farming or ranching experience. What he wants is the appreciation on the land. He does not need the creek to himself. He needs the land to be viable, which it is more so with good neighbor relations. That is a gamble on his temperament, Isaac said. It is, she agreed. But it is also a more elegant solution than the other two if it works, and it costs us nothing to send a letter first. He was quiet, looking at her. The lamp burned between them. All right, he said. Write the letter. She wrote it the next morning and sent it to Clement's St. Louis address, a clear and businesslike letter proposing a water access easement agreement at a fair annual rate, framed in terms of mutual benefit and long-term land value. She wrote it in the direct, unornamental way she wrote everything, saying exactly what she meant and no more. Clement wrote back in 3 weeks. He agreed. Garrett Webb, informed of this outcome, said which was the closest thing to astonishment he had been observed to express. December of 1882, and Louisa was sitting in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon making gingerbread with Clara, who was now a precise and excellent baker, and with Thomas, who was an enthusiastic and imprecise one, and with George, who was approaching 2 years old and had decided that gingerbread dough was a food, and was attempting to eat it directly from the bowl, which Clara was preventing with one hand while continuing to roll out her own portion with the other. She was laughing. She was laughing at George's determination and Clara's efficiency and Thomas's declaration that he was going to make his gingerbread horse look realistic. And the result of his effort, which looked like a horse that had had a significant accident, and at the kitchen that was warm and smell of spice, and at the sound of Isaac's boots on the porch. He came in the back door and stopped in the kitchen doorway and took in the scene: flour on every available surface, 3 children in varying states of gingerbread engagement, his wife with a smear of molasses on her cheek, and his face had the complete, private warmth of a man who has arrived somewhere he wants to be. Realistic horse, Thomas said, holding up his creation. Isaac looked at it with the gravity of a connoisseur. That is very good, Thomas, he said. It has 4 legs, Thomas confirmed. Several, Isaac agreed. Louisa looked at him over Thomas's head, and he looked back at her with those clear gray eyes, and what passed between them was everything. Every Tuesday morning with the accounts, every Sunday morning at the church, every fence post and every debt paid and every hailstorm and every evening by the lamp, all of it compressed into a single look between 2 people who have the deepest possible knowledge of each other. She reached up and wiped the molasses from her cheek. He crossed the kitchen and kissed the spot where it had been, briefly and simply, in the manner of a man who has the freedom to and does not need to make a statement of it. You, said Clara on principle. When I grow up, Thomas said without looking up from his horse, I am going to kiss someone. That is a reasonable plan, Isaac said. George said "Ga" and got another fistful of dough. Christmas of 1882 was different from Christmas of 1879 in every way that mattered, and the same in the ways that mattered more. She still made the dried apple pie, but now the table was larger and the room was warmer and there were 4 faces across from her instead of 2, and Isaac said grace in the plain, sincere way he did everything, and the children ate, and they were together, and it was enough. After dinner, when Thomas and George were asleep and Clara was reading in her room, She and Isaac sat together on the parlor settle with the fire burning and the winter quiet outside and the remains of the Christmas evening around them. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. "That first year," she said, "after George died, I made myself a promise that I was not going to ask for help. That I would work until I dropped before I would ask." She paused. "I was afraid that asking would mean admitting I could not manage alone, and admitting that felt like losing something essential." "I know," he said. "But then you came," she said, "and you never made me ask, she searched for the word. You saw what was needed and you had it, and you offered it in a way that I could accept because it was honest. The fence posts, the beef, walking me home." She looked at the fire. "You never offered help the way people offer charity. You offered it the way people offer a hand to someone who is already standing." He was quiet for a moment, and she could feel the quality of his attention on her, the same attention he had brought to her since the first day at the general store, when she had refused to let him carry the flour and he had simply accepted it. "I saw a woman working her land in October heat with a mallet and a post hole," he said. "I did not see someone who needed saving. I saw someone who knew what she was doing and had more work than she could do in the hours she had." His voice was low and even in the firelight. "I had extra cedar posts. It was not complicated." "It was to me," she said. "I know," he said, "and I respected that. I still do." She leaned into him and he put his arm around her and they sat together watching the fire. And outside the Kansas winter was going on as it always went on, vast and cold and indifferent. And inside the ranch house on the Townsend land the fire was warm and the children were sleeping, and everything she had built and everything she had fought for was right here, in this room, exactly where she had chosen to put it. January of 1883 began the way all good years begin, with a sense that the ground is solid. The ranch was prosperous by the modest standards of the Kansas plains. The cattle were healthy in the winter pastures, the honey business was running well, the accounts balanced, the Clement situation was resolved, and the family had the particular settled quality of people who have been tested and have come through to something real. There was one thing she had not yet told Isaac, and she told him on the 3rd of January in the morning over coffee, while the children were upstairs getting ready for the school day. She told him directly, the way she told him everything. He looked at her across the kitchen table, and for a moment his face went very still with the particular stillness of a man absorbing significant information. Then he smiled. Not the rare full smile, but something deeper and quieter, an expression that did not have a name exactly, or rather its name was simply joy, the plain, uncomplicated kind. When he said, "August," she said, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Good," he said, "that is very good." Thomas, coming down the stairs and possessing, as always, the exact timing of a child who arrives when something is happening, looked between them with the sensitivity of a 7-year-old who has learned to read rooms. "What is happening?" he said. "Nothing for the moment," Louisa said. "Go eat your oats." Thomas ate his oats with a suspicious expression that indicated he knew something was happening, had decided to wait, and would find out eventually, which was entirely accurate. Clara found out that evening, because Clara found out everything, and received the news with the gravity she brought to significant facts, and then, unexpectedly, hugged her mother around the waist with a fierceness that said more than her words would have. Then she went back to her book, because she was Clara, and that was what she did. The spring of 1883 was one of the finest Kansas had produced in a decade. The grass came in early and thick, the creek ran full, the hives were active from March, and Louisa worked with the particular energy of a woman whose body is doing something large, but who has no intention of reducing her pace on its account. Isaac watched this with calm attention and said nothing except, occasionally, sit down at the end of very long days, which she sometimes did. She went to the sod house in April, a warmer and greener April than most, and walked through the rooms again, and thought about the arithmetic at the table and the fence posts, and the debt, and the winter in the dark with the sewing in her lap and the crack in the stone. She stood in the main room with the afternoon light coming through the small window, and she thought, I kept what was mine. And then she went home to the ranch house, and she meant both things equally. The new branding season came, and she cooked for the crew of 12 again, though she was considerably larger than the previous year, and the crew treated her with the exaggerated care of cowboys who are unused to women who are completely unbothered by their own situation. And she fed them well and charged them nothing, and the work was good. Garrett Webb appeared one morning with a length of perfectly turned wood, clearly hand-lathed with great care, in the shape of a small rocking horse about 8 inches tall. He put it on the kitchen table without comment and left. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it on the mantel in the parlor, next to the carved horse that Thomas had been given 4 years ago, the one George had started, and she had finished by lamplight in the dark year, the horse that represented every hour she had sat alone with the work and the arithmetic and the refusal to let it be otherwise. The two horses sat side by side on the mantel through the spring and into the summer, and she thought about continuity sometimes when she looked at them. The thread that ran through all of it, the hard year and the cedar posts and the Sunday walks and the wedding and the children and the honey and the accounts and the Clement letter and the gingerbread afternoon, all of it one thing, one long continuous fact about who she was and what she had chosen. In the last week of July, when the summer heat was at its peak, and the ranch house was full of the sound of cicadas and the smell of cut hay, she and Isaac sat on the porch in the evening and watched the sun go down over the Kansas plains. The light was extraordinary, the long, liquid gold of a high summer evening, lying across the prairie grass in a way that made the whole landscape look like something worth painting. Thomas was showing George how to throw a stick for General the dog, with mixed results, since General had the dignified indifference of a large old dog who had given up on the concept of fetching as philosophically unsatisfying. Clara was on the porch steps reading. It was a perfectly ordinary evening. It was completely full. Isaac, she said. He turned to look at her. What was in that parcel at the post office, she said. The day we first spoke properly, at Hargrove's in December, you had a parcel. He looked momentarily surprised, not at the question but at the reach of her memory, the way she had filed things he had not known she'd kept. Sheet music, he said. I ordered it from a publisher in Cincinnati. My mother used to play piano. I was going to learn. She stared at him. Did you? No, he said. The ranch had a busy spring. There is a piano at the Alderton house, she said. It has been sitting empty since Mary left. I believe it might be for sale. Louisa, he said. You should learn, she said. You said your mother played, you should have it. He looked at her. The evening light was in his eyes, and she looked back at him across everything they were to each other, the equal weight of it, the shared work and the shared life, and the shared children on the lawn and the shared table and all the mornings and evenings and ordinary extraordinary days. And she thought about how she had said no at Hargrove's and he had said all right, and he had found another way, and she thought about how the whole of their love story was in that exchange. The respect for who she was, the patience, the willingness to find the honest path that let her stand on her own ground while walking toward him. Thank you, he said. We will have a piano, she said. I will take credit for the music. He laughed. The full, real laugh that she had first heard on the church hall floor on their wedding day, the one that was rare and therefore precious, and she laughed with him, and the evening went on around them with the last light on the grass and the children on the lawn and General's dignified refusal to fetch the stick. In the second week of August, on a Wednesday morning when the whole prairie seemed to be holding its breath in the heat, their second son was born. He was darker than George, with a shock of black hair and serious dark eyes that he blinked in the morning light with the focused attention of someone who has arrived and intends to assess the situation before committing to anything. She held him in the morning light of the bedroom, Isaac beside her, and she looked at this small person who was entirely new and entirely theirs, and she felt the full weight and breadth of her life, not just the present moment but all of it, the whole running length of it from the day at the grave to this morning, and it was large, All of it was large, and she was equal to it, and she had always been equal to it, and she had a partner who had known that before she did. "What do we call him?" she asked. Isaac looked at the baby for a long time. Then he said, "What about Henry?" "Henry Townsend," she said, turning it in her mouth. "Henry." The baby made a small sound, not in objection. "Henry," she said again, with the finality of something decided. "Yes, Henry." Clara came in with Thomas and George to meet Henry, and Thomas pronounced him small but acceptable, which was high praise from a 7-year-old. And George stared at him with the slightly offended expression of a 2-year-old who has just discovered that he is not, in fact, the smallest person in the building. And Clara held him with a competence that came from having watched her mother hold things carefully her whole life. And Isaac sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Louisa, and she leaned into him and watched their children with the new baby. And the Kansas morning was all around them. The sun on the prairie, the sound of the cicadas, the cattle in the far pasture, the beehives in the east meadow, the 2 horses on the mantel in the parlor, one carved by a dead man and one latched by an old man who spoke in syllables, both of them holding steady, and everything was exactly what it was, and it was enough. And it was more than enough, and it was hers.